Hi, everybody, and welcome aboard to Local Matters, where living local never felt so good. You know, the United States has a long and unfortunate history of election fraud and voting irregularities. In fact, the Heritage Foundation has compiled this huge list of election fraud cases from around the country. It is broken down by state, where individuals were either convicted of voter fraud or where a judge has had to overturn the results of an election. And in just a few moments, we're going to be talking with a former city councilman who believes voting irregularities cost him a loss of his city council seat. We're going to meet him when we come right back. You know why? You're watching Local Matters.
Dance. Let me see you move.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Local Matters. You know, according to the Heritage Festival, there is this huge list of voter fraud and irregularities throughout the country. Joining me on the set of Local Matters is former city councilman who believes that voter fraud and irregularities cost him his seat, and we're talking about none other than Mr. Saram Selassie. So welcome aboard to Local Matters. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, it's good to have you aboard. I hadn't seen you in a while.
Yeah.
You've been, I would imagine, dealing with other things right now.
Definitely.
You know, we don't have a lot of time. You know, the time always goes by so fast when we're sitting here. So I want to jump right in. So I want to go back. I want to take us back to October, was it October the 4th?
October the 4th.
Let's go back there to that night when you realized that you had lost that election, Saram. What really stood out in your mind that where you said, okay, I can't accept this loss. Something seems odd about this. What really stood out in your mind that you would want to take it as far as to really challenge the election?
Right. Well, Dottie, let's first keep in mind that on October the 4th, as soon as the polls close, there's a printout that comes out of the results of the votes at the polls. I was getting all kind of calls saying congratulations because everybody knew and word was getting out that I won at the polls. However, there was something that we're going to talk about called absentee ballots. And when those numbers were added to the numbers that were already coming from the polls, which it's much harder to do voter fraud or have irregularities at the polls as opposed to absentee ballots. But when those numbers came in, it kicked me out. And Dottie, I was shocked. I was very shocked and deeply upset, but also not surprised. Because when I go back to that night, I had been tracking and watching these just overwhelming amounts of absentee ballots that were coming in for just the Ward 3 city council race. This is public record, and the city clerk posted each and every week as we get closer to the election date. And I was like, I'm a little nervous about that, but oh well, I'm going to work hard and run a good clean campaign. But as soon as that came in and I saw those absentee ballots kick me out, it really was disappointing.
So you say that you were right there, you were winning, but then these absentee ballots came in, the numbers came in, and that's what sort of kicked you out.
Right.
Do you remember what time these absentee ballots came in? Were they during the course of the day? Was it after the election? It must have been after the election final numbers were in.
Right. It was after the polls close at 7, then the absentee ballots start to get counted as well, and then those numbers get added in later, right after as the polls are closing, and then as well as provisional ballots, they get added in later as well. But you know, when those numbers were coming in and I saw through the weeks leading up to the election the amount of numbers and absentee ballots that were coming in, I was reminded of 2014. Just a couple of years ago, there was a campaign to try to oust the current county commissioner, Mr. Fred Wilson. And the primary person that was involved in that campaign was a guy by the name of James Montgomery.
Okay.
And I had already been hearing and then saw some television shows that he was working absentee ballots. And that really caused me concern going forward.
Wow. So From what I understand, absentee ballots, and I want to bring up a full screen that I have, the actual, a reason why, first of all, let's bring that up, why anyone would be filling out an absentee ballot in the first place. Because there are different types of ballots that one could fill out that really can make a difference, a huge difference in who wins an election. Absentee ballots are one.
Right. Provisional
Ballots are another. We'll
Right.
talk about that in just a few moments. But let's look at our absentee ballots. So when we're looking at an absentee ballot, somebody it's given an absentee ballot. Here are some of the reasons why one would be filling out an absentee ballot in the first place.
Right.
And most people are aware of this, but for those who are watching the show and may not realize that, because we can't assume that everyone knows.
Right.
I mean, 20 years ago, I didn't really understand who would be filling out an absentee ballot.
Right.
Number one, absentee, and instead of for the county, I would focus more on the city, so that
Right.
would be absent from the city on election day. Number two would be if a person is ill or has a physical disability.
Right.
Number three, living outside of the city. Those are college students, people that are in the military. Number four, if we could go ahead and bring those up as well, an appointed election worker himself. There are many times where people are working at the polls outside of their district, so they're not going to be there perhaps in time enough. They know that, so they're going to go ahead and vote early, vote an
Correct.
absentee ballot. And in working, for folks who are working these 10-hour shifts that really coincide with polling hours, those are some of the reasons why people or an individual would be voting an
Right.
absentee ballot. And that's fine. So when those absentee ballots came in, were you able to take a look at those ballots?
So there's a lot I still can't fully go into because of my attorney-client privilege. But one thing I can go ahead and talk about is that out of the 19 absentee ballots that were cast for my opponent,
And that's the number we're working with, 19. About
19,
okay.
out of those 19, the majority of them said that they had some type of physical illness that you just showed that would prevent them from being at the polls on election day. Well, Dottie, when I looked at public record information, when you vote, the Secretary of State keeps a track or gives voter credits for when you go to the polls and vote. It doesn't say who you voted for, but it says you went to the polls and actually voted.
Right.
Out of the 19, Dottie, 13 people, I repeat, 13 individuals
Okay.
went to the polls either on August the 23rd for the first Anniston municipal election or on November the 8th in the general presidential election.
Right.
So in between, just on October the 4th, all these individuals said, the majority of them said they had that physical illness, couldn't go to the polls. But the history shows that they were able to vote in person for both of those elections. So
Wow.
that told me, there's a serious problem here, Daddy. And people were going out talking to some of these individuals, not in my instruction or anything, but
Right.
just coming back to me, you know how the rumor mill can work.
Right.
And they were telling me that, look, some of these people didn't know what was going on. And we just saw in a recent Anniston Star article, you had one voter said, look, I just signed a paper. I don't know who I voted for. And I feel so sorry for these individuals, Dottie. Many of these are senior citizens, African-American senior citizens. And I always wonder, how in the world did we go from civil rights to evil rights?
Okay.
These
okay.
people were manipulated and did not have a clue really of what they were doing. And just because someone came into their house and told them, it's okay to vote at home, you can just vote here, you're this. We've even found through some of these depositions that people were instructed on what their disability was that prevented them from going to the polls.
Wow.
How dare someone go and do that to these individuals? And
Right.
these are people, again, who saw people getting beat and killed for the right to vote. They remember Bloody Sunday. But then all the way down to the youngest elected African-American official, all the way down to this time, to be able to participate in this type of activity, get these people to do this, to just try to kick me out and win at all costs. That's not right. And to me, the Ward 3 election was stolen.
You believe and of course I can tell you're passionate about this, and you believe passionately that these people were approached in their homes, they were given ballots to sign, they didn't, and half of them didn't know why.
They didn't know why. Some of them just thought they were helping out a friend, just a friend who was coming to them and asking for their participation in this process. But again, Dottie, I think as the trial moves forward, as we get closer to that date, more of the truth will come out and more facts will be revealed. And I truly believe that this election should be overturned.
Okay. When we come back, we're running out of time. I hear my director, when we come back, we're going to be talking more about this challenged election, because what I want to know, too, is when we come back, those same individuals that voted, those absentee ballots, did they show up at the polls? Because I understand some of them filled out the absentee ballots, but also showed up at the polls. So we'll be right back with more Local Matter. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Local Matters, where living local never felt so good. I am sitting here on the set, joined with former City Councilman Saram Selassie, and we've been talking everything about the challenged election from October the 4th, of course, back in 2016. So I want us to go back, because we've been talking about this. In fact, the entire premise has been on absentee ballots that you were really questioning.
Right.
And it's not like you lost this election. This was a runoff.
Right.
So it's not like you lost the election 20, 30, 40, 50%, not even really 10%. We were talking about 19 votes. And it had everything to do with 19 votes that were absentee ballots. So, and from what we were talking about earlier, if you're just joining us, many people who filled out the absentee ballots, according to what you're telling us, Saram, is that many of these people didn't know what they were filling.
They didn't,
out.
and again, they've been to the polls either on October the 23rd or November the 8th. They've been before. Let me talk about a specific incident on August the 23rd. One lady actually had filled out an absentee ballot, but still showed up to the polls and signed her name as if she was going to vote.
Right.
And the clerks, they had to say, hey, no, you can't do that. And just again, she was one of the people that was solicited by James Montgomery. And also I have to put out there was a person that lives at the address of Councilman David Reddick. So the majority of these absentee ballots out of that 19, the majority of them only had 2 people on them, James Montgomery and a person that was living at the address of Councilman David Reddick. Well, there's no secret that Councilman Reddick has targeted me throughout social media and especially privately as well, but all because of my vision and my intention of moving the city forward. Dottie, I'll be honest with you. I think there are people in this city that honestly want Anniston to be a Ferguson, that honestly want Anniston to go back in the dark ages and not progress.
And I don't mean to laugh by any means. I really
I
don't,
understand,
but really.
but that's the type of mentality that we're dealing with some individuals in this community, and their hands are all over these absentee ballots. If like you said, if my opponent had beaten me by 60 some odd percent, like I did him in 2012, I would have no questions.
Right.
But when you have these same old characters who tried the same thing in 2014, then rear their ugly heads in this particular situation, I have to raise a red flag. I have to try to seek out and find out what was the truth dealing with these absentee ballots. And again, the majority of these people that we're already hearing from the depositions, they're saying, look, we really didn't know what was going on. We just thought and were told that we could vote this way at home.
So here's the thing, going back, do you think that the poll workers did their due diligence? Because you mentioned that some of the poll workers actually said, oh no, you can't, because we already have you down here. And that actually happened to me when I lived over in Atlanta. I moved from one county to another county.
Right.
And so I proceeded to go down. I was in Fulton County. That was my last stop in Atlanta before I moved back home, back here to Anniston.
Right.
And I wanted to vote in the presidential election. And when I got up there, they looked at and they saw my name and they said, oh no, you can't vote here in Fulton County. You've got to go back to Cobb County where you were living prior and vote there. So that's them doing their job.
Right.
And they did an excellent job. They said you can do one of two things. You can go drive back over to Cobb County, and you can vote there, or I can have you fill out a provisional ballot here, and it will be counted in later. But you can't do both.
Right, right.
But you can't do both.
Dottie, I don't blame those poll workers. I don't blame the voters. I blame the people that colluded with each other to do anything they could to kick me out of office. You know, I even look at this now interesting situation where these people are being harassed. It's funny they're trying to say that I'm harassing people, but these individuals were targeted by the ones that solicited these absentee ballots. If you look at any normal procedure in absentee balloting process, you don't have so many names of two individuals on all these absentee ballots. It may be you have a sick mother, you're going to witness that absentee ballot, Dottie. Your sister or another relative is going to witness it right there in your home, in the comfort of your home, because you know that your mother is sick. It's not going to be that Dottie and Say Ron were part of a whole list of people that only had two names on these absentee ballots. That just shows and speaks to what I know happened and what we're being told. And another point along with that, Dottie, when you think about the blame game and people being harassed, why in the world
and I don't mean to cut you off, because from, of course, through rumor, there are many rumors going around, and of course different types of things being presented on social media, that your attorney was going around harassing many sick and elderly people in Ward 3, trying to make them talk about their health and etc.
Dottie, my opponent's current attorney, Donald Stewart, he now says he represents both Ben Little and the voters. Ben Little and the voters. How does that make any sense? Again, I've always said, and I hate to the people out in the community that this process has taken this long, but if there was nothing wrong that happened, let's talk. Come in the court just like I did in my deposition, give your deposition, give your testimony, and be done with it. But to have the attorney representing both Little and the voters, and one lady came back and Dottie, she honestly said, no, he doesn't represent me. I want to give my deposition.
Who is the attorney for? I understand, is it
Donald Stewart, right? And it's funny because, again, from civil rights to evil rights, how did we get so far? Donald Stewart is the same person that Ben Little and James Montgomery and others have called a white devil all these years because of the PCB settlement and the way in which they said that he stole the money. But now they're all together and talking about that I and my attorney are doing things wrong in this process. No, Dottie, that doesn't make logical sense. And what I'm asking and what we're asking the court for is just justice in this situation. Not for myself, but for the citizens of Ward 3 and the city of Anniston as a whole.
And speaking of that, we're getting ready to go break. When we come back, I want to talk about justice, because that's supposed to take place June 20th in the courts now, to finally sort of end it all, if you will. We'll be right back to talk more about this upcoming date for depositions to be finalized. We'll be right back with more Local Matters. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Local Matters, where living local never felt so good. I'm Dottie Rimpsey, and I'm joined with former City Councilman Saram Selassie. If you're just joining us, you've missed a very passionate show, but hopefully you're going to be able to stay with us as we go into our last segment. We've been talking about the election that has been challenged by former Councilman Selassie, because he says, and he believes that there were a huge influx, if you will, of voting irregularities. So I want to just pick up where we left off.
Right.
You lost the election by 19 or so
10 votes. 10 votes. The 19 absentee ballots are what kicked me out.
All right, here's the thing. We are going to be, it's finally going to be finalized, if you will, on the 20th of June. So they're asking the remaining of depositions now, instead of an attorney approaching and going into people's homes and to just sort of rule out anything that might give people the impression or the perception that people are being harassed. The judge now, the judge has asked that everybody now find themselves, make sure they're in court on June the 20th to finalize these depositions.
Exactly. The judge is tired. I would assume he is. I'm tired. He wants the depositions all to wrap up on June 20th. And from June 20th, after the depositions, I would assume that he's going to set a final trial date. That is my hope and prayer, and it's been my hope and prayer the entire time to have us a trial date. And the depositions will try to get more information on the process, the thoughts and ideas that we have and that have already been proven in other depositions of activity that happened and irregularities. But that's going to be very important. And I want to talk about, it's not just the absentee ballot issues that are out there, Dottie. There are also an issue dealing with out-of-district voters. And let me talk about that. That's just another way that you can have voter fraud. Now, the first person that was deposed, actually, I'm not going to call names, but
Right.
was a white individual. You know, they keep trying to make this a white and black thing, but he was
Yeah,
a white
I've heard
individual.
that. I've heard that
He
too.
voted in the election. He admitted to living outside of the city, but then also said he voted for Ben Little. By law, that vote should be cast out. And I do appreciate that voter for his honesty, getting to that deposition and doing the right thing. But then you have individuals who continue to try to defame me and defame my name, like Jeffrey Williams. Jeffrey Williams voted in the Ward 3 election, lives in Saks, this is no secret to many people, but used his funeral home address to vote in my election. His funeral home address.
Okay.
Now imagine, Dottie, I know a lot of people in Ward 3 on Noble Street and other business districts. Imagine if I went out and solicited people that live outside the city but work in their businesses to vote for me in my election.
Wow.
That would just be insane, Dottie. But that's what happened during this October the 4th Ward 3 runoff. People like your Jeffrey Williams, David Reddicks, Ben Littles, they all came with this idea to do whatever it took to kick me out. And again, I'm all here for the service of the people. That I have no hidden agendas, I have no secrets or whatever. I'm just here to serve the people as best I can and give the citizens what they deserve, which is an Anniston that is moving forward.
Okay. So here's my question to you. No matter what it's the final outcome of this, because after the final depositions are going to be taken June 20th, and we don't know how long that's going to take. It could be weeks before we know. Hopefully not months, but they maybe weeks.
Right.
But no matter how it ends, whether it ends with the judge overturning this case, which can be done, as I mentioned earlier in my opening statement,
Right.
that has happened. It happens throughout this country more times than you know. It really does. So let's say it doesn't happen though in your favor. He rules that he's going to leave everything in place as is. What would you say to voters as we move forward? What would you like to leave voters with as we move forward in terms of what should they be thinking about and action? So something like this we can just be more aware as a community about absentee ballots, provisional ballots, things of that nature.
Right. I mean, the main message, regardless of the outcome, that I want to leave with the voters is make sure that the person in office represents you. Because whenever you go to the polls and vote, that accountability just doesn't stop at the ballot place. It's up to you as a voter, and even me right now as a perceivably average citizen, it's still up to us as individuals to hold local, state, and federal government accountable for their actions. So I'm not going to even go into the long list of things that my former opponent and current opponent is doing wrong right now. That's not important. It's up to the voters to hold those individuals accountable. And that's all I've ever hopefully been able to give the citizens of Ward 3 is accountability. And again, that's why I do think I was reelected at the polls. But this absentee balloting process that went on that I know was full of all types of issues, I'm holding this process accountable. The voters deserve to have a free and fair election to make sure that their representative represents them.
Because so it sounds like, too, that we just need to really make sure we're tightening up our election processes at the polls,
Yes.
before the polls, making sure that absentee ballots are in the proper envelopes that they need to be in, making sure witnesses are there as well, affidavits are there. All of those things have to be done
Yes.
when you're filling out an absentee ballot.
Right.
But I, too, would say more awareness and education needs to be done in our communities
Definitely.
about how you vote. Because a lot of people, and especially senior citizens who are up in age now and may be sick, continue to education and awareness is key
Right.
when we're talking about getting to the polls.
And a lot of this
proper
can
voting.
happen with our fraternal organizations, but also what really hurt me during this process, James Montgomery, a fraternity brother of mine, Alpha Phi Alpha, David Reddick and Jeffrey Williams, members of the Prince Hall affiliated Masons. It's so hurtful to see our organizations teaming up against another African American when they were put there to move our communities forward.
Well, I want to thank you again for coming on Local Matters and telling your story. We're going to be looking out to see what the final answer is going to be for Ward 3. after June 20th. And I want to thank you for joining us here on Local Matters. We'll look forward to seeing you back here next week because if it's local, it matters. Good night.